stuck. Who's got a question, comment, consideration, tragedy, catastrophe, and such? Disasters, queries, inquisitions, tortures, anything?
See Harry back.
Well, yes, we're always glad to see Harry back. Hi, Harry. How you doing? Well, that's all we can say, isn't it? That's right. Okay. Yes, Joe. Mm-hmm. Judas? Well, he hung himself, right?
When I read that, they said he fell on the field of
Rocks, yeah. Field of blood, Akadama, yeah. Yeah. Which killed him? I don't know. The Bible really doesn't say. It says both, that he hanged and or hung himself. I guess hanged is the correct grammar. For some reason, I've never understood that as long as I live. But anyway, he hanged himself, and then whether that actually succeeded in killing him or not is somewhat up to question. Depends a lot on how you translate those Greek terms there in the Gospels. It could be that he became unconscious, slipped off of whatever he was standing on, or whatever, or the rope broke, or the tree limb broke, and he fell down and cut himself open on rocks there at that field, and then that probably what killed him. He might have bled out. Interestingly enough, the Coptic Church records Judas as a saint. Yeah, the Coptic Church feels or believes, because of their writings, the commentators, early commentators that we have records of in the early part of the church, feels that Judas repented by being sorry for his betrayal, returning the coins to the Sanhedrin, or to the chief priests anyway. Yes, he did attempt to hang himself, but he actually then died not by his own hand, but by a happenstance that was really under God's control. And that therefore, this was God's way of indicating that he was saved. And thus, because of his status and the apostles, and because of his act of repentance, very public act of repentance, they accord him the status of saint. The Western Church, however, has never done that. The Western Church has always held that Judas committed suicide. Whether he actually achieved suicide or not, that was his goal, that was his desire, and therefore they account him as damned. Of course, in more recent times, the last 100 years for sure, the status of suicides has been somewhat changed in the church. The church no longer, as just a blanket condemnation on all suicides are damned and go to hell and all that. They no longer hold that. No church that I know of holds that, unless it's maybe a cult of some kind. In the Christian church, that is not held any longer, anywhere that I know of. The Roman Church does not teach that anymore. Our Lutheran Church, Wisconsin Synod and Missouri Synod, no longer teach that either. It is assumed that anybody who either wants to kill themselves or tries to kill themselves or actually kills themselves are, by definition, crazy, insane. And therefore, because they're insane, they can't be held accountable for their actions. That's kind of the general rule nowadays. It would have to be a real marked example. Somebody would have to leave something behind or say something very, very clear, unmistakable as an unbeliever, denying God, denying Christ, things like that, right before they died or something like that, in order for that suicide to not be considered an act of insanity rather than an act of unbelief. So the benefit of the doubt now has gone to the suicide person rather than the opposite. Used to be always the benefit of the doubt was to the church, basically, in church condemning the suicide. Now it's 180 degrees, and now the benefit of the doubt goes to the suicide and not to any condemnation. Yes, ma'am.
Choose to commit
There again, that is considered that they are not of the right mind by the church. That they are either under the influence of pain or drugs or other people who are encouraging them to do this, and therefore they are not responsible. Again, if on the other hand they make a real declaration, I don't believe in God, I don't believe in hereafter, I don't believe in heaven, I don't believe in Jesus, and that kind of thing, and I just want to get rid of this world and whatever, that's a different story. So basically what's happened is that the church now looks for evidence, one way or the other, of either belief or unbelief first, before they make any determination. And if there is no evidence of unbelief, and if the person was even a kind of a shirt tail, a churchgoer or whatever, then they get the benefit of the doubt. Yeah, which I think is best. I think that's a more gospel-oriented, more evangelical, if you want to use that term, way to look on it. I really do. It's another one of those things where the church, even our gospel church, even our Lutheran church and whatever, prides itself on the gospel and means of grace and everything. It's another example of them tending sometimes towards legalism and Phariseeism and pietism when they really didn't need to. But they do kind of we'll talk about that with Luther here in a minute, kind of as a reaction. Well, the world is going this way, so we're going to go the opposite way. Not that the world maybe is right, but maybe the questions that the world asks are questions that need to be more adequately addressed rather than just giving a blanket condemnation. Okay, it's kind of like what I wrote yesterday or last week about confirmation. Confirmation, when it started in this country in the 1800s, late 1800s and into the 1900s, became an obstacle course. That was the whole idea. And that was because of the liberalism in other church bodies. And so the Lutherans kind of took it upon themselves to make it as much of a torture as they possibly could. And they succeeded. And in doing so, succeeded in running most of the young people out of the church permanently. I can't tell you the horror stories that I have heard from people over the years. And it's funny, you talk to pre-World War II people, and they kind of look on it like a badge of honor. Oh, I made it. I went through Pastor Hoffenschmiel's catechism class. Man, was he a bear, And post-World War II generation, baby boomers, don't look at it that way. The baby boomers, for the most part, look on it like, man, I hated that. I hated all that dumb memory work. I hated that examination Sunday when I was made to look like a fool because I couldn't remember the 8th commandment, and stuff like that. So complete divide between the pre-war generation and the post-war generation. And for the most part, we have pretty much lost the baby boomers and their children entirely to the Lutheran Church and other churches too. And I think that's a huge reason why. And as I pointed out in my insert last week, it was totally unnecessary. But there again, a lot of times, we pride ourselves on being conservative. We pride ourselves on being traditional. We pride ourselves on being biblical and historic and everything, except sometimes we put the emphasis on the wrong things. And therefore, our erstwhile conservatism and traditionalism and whatever turns out to be very more ego than anything else, and pride more than anything else. And unfortunate. And I guess the real unfortunate thing is not only that that happened, but that nobody recognized what was going on. That's the thing that startles me, is that nobody saw that this was wrong. Everybody just went along with it. That's kind of sad. So, and suicide is just another one of those many examples of the church having a knee-jerk conservative reaction, and that becoming instilled as a doctrine, whether it's biblical or not. And that's what happens. I've fought against it my entire ministry, and it's very frustrating, extremely frustrating, because I can't get my brother pastors to even consider some of these things. They won't even talk about it, because that's liberal, that's bad, that's too open, that's too whatever. It's just, and they're scared to death. Really, frankly, they're scared to death of being seen as anything but rabid, staunch rednecks in a theological sense. I think that, frankly, is a sign of lack of confidence. A person who is, my father taught me this, a person who is very confident in their teachings and very confident in their understanding is not afraid to debate people. Is not afraid to listen to the other side, because they're very confident they can win. I think my peers refuse to listen and refuse to consider things because they're not very confident, actually. They put on a show as being confident, but they're really not. So, question of the day: what is the state of the soul after death? I got an interesting question yesterday. A person asked about the state of the soul and pointed out that Luther believed in something called soul sleep. And that is very true. And that in writing, numerous times, he denied, this is Luther now. I don't know if there's two L's there or not, probably not. But he denied the immortality of the soul. That may shock you when you hear that. That Luther very specifically and repeatedly referred to the doctrine of the immortality of the soul as so much papal dung. One of the papal false doctrines, one of the popes and the Roman Church's false doctrines. Why would Luther do that? And what do you suppose he meant by that? And denying the immortality of the soul. He said the immortality of the soul is a false doctrine. And if I add one word to that immortality, you'll, I think, understand exactly. Very good, yes. Luther saw purgatory as, well, to be fair, he saw the sacrifice of the Mass and that whole sacrificial system as being the heart and core of Rome's false doctrines. And he called the doctrine of the Mass, that is, that it turned it in, instead of God giving us something, we bring something to God, right? He called that the mother or the seed of all of Rome's false doctrine. And he said the first thing it led to was, even before the business about Mary and the saints and everything, even before that, it led, he believes, and I think he's right, to purgatory. The two are absolutely connected. You're bringing the sacrifice to Jesus in the Mass reduces your time in purgatory. I mean, the two are absolutely and inextricably linked. All right? So, in order to battle the idea of the sacrifice of the Mass, and in order to battle the idea of purgatory and suffering for sins after death, he obviously would attack the whole idea that the soul experiences things as in the same kind of way we do here. All right? In other words, the Romans teach that in purgatory there is time. All right? They have to, because the punishments of purgatory are measured in time. They're not measured by, well, this guy gets fire, and this guy gets hot bricks, and this guy gets, porcupine quills, and this guy gets sticker patches, and this guy. No, the torture of purgatory is pretty much the same for everybody. It's worse than hell. Okay, in the Roman mind, not so much today, but as it began and as it played out during the Middle Ages, purgatory was worse, and all the way up to my wife's time in parochial school, in Roman day school. She was taught in Roman school, and she went 7, 8 grades all the way through, and she was taught that purgatory is worse as far as physical pain, is worse than hell. Right? Worse than hell. That's what she was taught, and that's Roman teaching. Guy by the name of a Roman theologian by the name of Bellarmine really kind of perfected that whole idea of hell being, purgatory being worse than hell. Okay, and so everybody suffers that. The difference is between John and Frank is that John went to Mass regularly. And so his days in purgatory, or years in purgatory, are less than Frank's, who got First Communion and confirmation and maybe got married in the Roman Church and never went again until the day he died. And so he has less sacrifices, he has left less goodies, less good works to apply to his time in purgatory. So he spends 1,000,000 years in purgatory, whereas John only spends 100,000 years. All right? So you have to understand, in heaven, though, as far as Romans are concerned, in heaven, time ceases. There is no time. And in hell, there is no time. The only place there's time in the Roman mind is in purgatory. And even in limbo. Now, limbos have been denied now by the Roman Church. But when there was the two limbos, limbo of the ancients and limbo of unbaptized babies, called limbo infantum, okay, and limbo patri, fathers, they're gone now. But even in those, no time. There's no time. You can't move from limbos to hell or heaven. So when the Pope, supposedly, canceled limbo infantum, this was John Paul, then all of those souls in limbo infantum were automatically released to purgatory. And then when Francis removed patri first, when limbo patri was removed, all of those souls went to purgatory. When Francis got rid of limbo infantum, all those souls went immediately to purgatory. So now there's just hell, purgatory, and heaven. But in hell and heaven, there's no time. Only time in purgatory. And that's where 99.9999999% of people go to their way of thinking. You had a question?
I'm just going to make a statement. I don't think that all Catholics and all Catholic schools taught that way. Like you said, it was an old belief that carried through, but I have a feeling that the particular group that was running that
Sure. Yes. Yes.
was because the ones that we had in Pennsylvania,
Yes.
that was never,
Yes. That is correct. That is correct.
even though you sort of can't, it's really
Yeah.
certain sects of Catholic.
Yeah. Remember that the schools, and in some cases, whole parishes or whole dioceses, would be connected to one of the orders. All right? So there's the Franciscan order, there's the Dominican order, there's the Jesuit order, and so on and so forth. by and large, the Dominicans are the most conservative. The Franciscans are kind of middle of the roaders, and the Jesuits are liberal. You can tell because Francis is a Jesuit, and he is very liberal in his way of thinking. Okay, so if your parish or your parish school, and especially if your parish may not be one thing or another, but in order to start the school, a lot of times these different orders would fund the building of the school or the paying of the teachers. And the nuns and or the other teachers who would be coming there would be Dominicans or Franciscans or whatever. And so at St. Francis, where my wife went, that was a Franciscan parish. And the Franciscans they went with Bellarmine. If it had been a Jesuit, like in Tucson, for example, Sal Point, that's a Jesuit school. If it had been a Jesuit school, they wouldn't have been taught that. You're right. Yeah. And today, I don't know that anybody, even the Dominicans or Franciscans, I don't know that they actually teach that anymore. Purgatory is still there, but it's way played down today. So get back to this. So why would he? Okay. So in order to counter or to attack the idea of physical suffering in purgatory, Luther denied the immortality of the soul. Now, what he really denied is the continuous immortality of the soul. See? If you add that word, that then you understand. In other words, Luther believed that when a person died, they went into soul sleep. So they were unaware of anything going on. A total sleep, okay, based on both the Hebrew and the Greek terms for sleep, meaning rest, unawareness, uninvolvement with daily activities, and so on and so forth. This is the idea behind those words, okay? He did not deny that the soul and body separated, okay? And he did, although he would say, early in his teaching, he would say that the soul resides with the body. Not in the body so much, but with the body, okay? Which is why Lutherans disavowed cremation for so long, is because of this, okay? So the soul was hovering around the body kind of ideas, kind of there, all right? Luther absolutely believed in the resurrection of the dead, absolutely positively, no question about it, and he believed that the soul and body would be reunited and that they would live in bliss and perfection forever. Okay? So he did not deny the immortality of the soul in the sense of that once you're dead, and you disappear, you're annihilated, you don't exist anymore. He did not teach that. Never he taught that. Okay? He just taught that you go to death and sleep the soul. Now, the point is that it doesn't matter. Because one thing he agreed on is that there's no time in heaven. Okay? If there is no time in heaven, then the time, quote unquote, or the space, if you will, between your separation of body and soul, which is the definition of death, and the last day is what? It's nothing. The best way to describe it in our terms here and now, because we're connected to that crazy thing, the best thing to say is that, the most accurate thing to say is that it's instantaneous. As far as we're concerned, it's the blink of an eye, which Luther, and I don't know if it's Luther, it was one of the people said, this is why Paul talks about the twinkling of an eye, the blink of an eye. I can't prove, nobody can prove that's why Paul said that. Paul was just trying to say it happens very fast. I don't know that he was actually trying to say that, you know, you blink your eyes, you close your eyes, you open your eyes, you're in heaven and it's the last day already. Okay. Now that may be true. I don't know. Okay. Maybe that's why Paul used it. I can't prove that one way or another. But it fits the Luther's idea of soul sleep and then immediately or instantaneously or however word you want to use is last day, resurrection. Boom. Okay, so it really doesn't matter if Luther's right or not. It really doesn't matter who's right or wrong, because since there's no time, it's impossible for us to describe that experience. Yes?
It's kind of a convoluted excuse.
It is.
Jesus says to the thief,
Right.
today
Yes,
you will
but
be with me in heaven.
But he didn't say how the thief would experience paradise. He didn't say you will experience it only as a spirit for 2,000 years, and then you'll experience it as a body and spirit. He didn't say that. He just said today. Well, what's today with God? Right, exactly. Now, you can make the argument that Jesus was still alive when he said that. Okay, and so he was still connected to the clock when he said that, all right? But that still doesn't change the fact that when he dies and when the thief dies, then as far as they are concerned, since there's no passage of time, then the resurrection happens immediately.
He was God,
Yes,
and he was everywhere,
right,
including heaven and time.
right. So it's like the Bible teaches that everything is now to God. You could say everything is today to God and be correct. The point is that this is not a dogma, okay? It can't be, right? You can't accuse Luther of heresy. And if I said, no, I don't believe in the slow sleep, I believe that you wander around, talk to people in your spirit and blah, 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 for whatever period of space, whatever, and then the last day comes, I can't be accused of heresy either. In other words, the church has not come to a absolute dogmatic conclusion on this question. We do not know the state of the soul after death. All we know is the state of the soul and the body after the last day. That we know. Once the resurrection from the dead happens on the last day, that is a dogma. Body and soul come back together. The unbelievers go to hell. The believers go to heaven, if they're not there already, and live forever in peace and harmony and bliss with God. That is a teaching. That is not maybe a fundamental teaching, but it is a important and correct teaching of Scripture.
Introduction and final also at the same time.
Yeah, right. At the same time, as far as we're concerned, since there is no time, we cannot, our brains cannot conceive of an existence without this ticking thing up here. We just can't. I mean, we live by it. We live by, we have schedule our lives by it. We sleep by it. We eat by it. We do everything by it. That in the calendar. And we cannot conceive of the non-passage of time. No sunsets, no sunrises, no days, no weeks, no months, no years. We just can't conceive of that. That's beyond our comprehension. Okay? All right. So let's go on to Exodus. We are on chapter 2. Just go over those questions at the top of page 18 once again. God might use a bush, if for no other reason, that this would be, on the one hand, something very familiar to Moses, but also because of his education, something very, shall we say, confusing, or his scientific curiosity would be engaged, right? So this would be something that a person like Moses would find fascinating, and therefore draw him in. Angel of the Lord, again, the angel of the Lord, God's use of the angel of the Lord and the appearance of the second person of the Trinity in some visible form, there's no particular rhyme or reason for it as far as we can see. Why would the very first time that the angel of the Lord appears, that Jesus or that the second member of the Son of God takes on visible form, appear to Hagar and not like Abraham first. But that's the fact. So there's no rhyme or reason. God just chooses to do it when he does it. And that's all you can say there. These appearances show us that God is very engaged with his children, and with the world in general, people in general. There are times when a theophany, that is an appearance of God, appears not just to believers but to unbelievers. So God is engaged in the world. And why doesn't God make such appearances today? He doesn't need to, because he's got the Bible. You could say the Bible is a theophany. That's what it is, because it is divine. This is a divine artifact. So it would be just the same as if, or even, I would say better, frankly, would be even better than if you were digging in your backyard and you dug up a chunk of the real cross, or dug up the chalice of the Last Supper, right? The Holy Grail, all right? The Bible is better than that. Those things are artifacts, yes, and if they really still exist, they would be very important and very interesting artifacts, and holy in a sense that they were used by God. But this is holy in the sense that it is God's living, active word, and therefore something very special. So God does not need to appear. That is visible. The word is visible. It's audible. It's speakable. It's always effective. It always accomplishes what God desires it to accomplish, which is either the conversion of hearts or the hardening of hearts. Both of the things are part of God's will, right? We have to understand that. Okay. All right, let's move on then and look at the next section. It's get too cold in here. 7 to 12. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call a nurse for you, that the Hebrew woman may come and nurse the child?" Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go ahead," and the girl called the child's mother. The Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages." Interesting. So the woman took the child and nursed him. The child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter. He became her son. And she named him Moses and said, "Because I drew him out of the water." Now it came about in those days when Moses had grown up that he went out to his brethren and looked on their hard labors. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. He looked this way and that. And when he saw there was no one around, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. We'll stop there for now. The Lord says he has surely seen the tribulations of his children in Egypt. Okay? I have seen. When the Hebrew does this, when the Hebrew repeats, okay, that is for emphasis, right? Meaning that God has, very often it's translated surely seen, or absolutely seen, or really seen, or something along those lines. The fact is, of course, God never turned his eyes away for even a moment, much less years or decades. He has seen everything and remembers it all. Note that God says he's already come down. Of course, the Lord does not need to leave heaven and actually travel to earth to impose his will on a situation. This is yet another anthropomorphism. Remember that the Bible's not written for God. Okay? The Bible's written to people. And people need very often, and even if they don't think they need, God decides they need human references. And thus God uses terms like eyes, ears, arms, hands, feet, and things like that. Okay? That doesn't mean that those things exist in the sense of physical, visible with God. God is a spirit. God has no looks. He doesn't look like anything. When we talk about the image of God, we're not talking about what he looks like. We're talking about what he is like. Okay? That's his image because he's a spirit. Okay? By this, God is simply saying he has formulated a plan and that it's already as good as carried out in his mind. Just as he selected each one of you by name before the creation of the first Adam, Atom, okay, for eternal life in heaven and salvation. In that same sense, the Exodus is as good as done. The rescue of Israel from slavery is as good as done. That's the way God sees it. Of course, again, because there is no time with God. And so he sees creation and judgment day in the same picture. Very wide screen, I guess we would say. Yeah.
Doesn't that mean that we have predestination?
Yes, we do. But only predestination to heaven, not predestination to hell. Even though that makes no sense.
You're right.
Yes. No. This is why the Calvinists are mixed up. This is why they're crazy. Is because to them, they have to, if they have one, they have to have the other. Because that's logical.
It's human life.
If you don't predestinate Henry to heaven, you are automatically predestining Henry to hell. Right? That's human logic, isn't it? Okay? That's human logic. So the Calvinists, or John Calvin in particular, the Calvinists said, oh, that's the way it must be. And so in eternity, God predestined each and every individual who would ever be born to either heaven or hell. And it's a done deal. You can't change it. It is what it is. The only thing you have to figure out is where you're going. That's what you have, because you don't know. So you have to figure that out. And so for a Calvinist, for a pure Presbyterian, okay, you try to act very holy and very good to assure yourself that you have been chosen for heaven. Okay? That's why you're good. You're good not to earn heaven, but to comfort yourself. So that as long as you're doing good stuff, you can be assured that you're going to heaven. And if you do nothing but bad stuff, then you can be assured, or somebody can tell you or point to you and say, well, you're lost. See, so that's the way the Calvinists look at it. Now, Arminians didn't like that, of course. Jacob Arminius, he didn't like that. He said that you're telling that God predestined people to hell? That's a terrible thing to say about God. Which Calvin said, yes, I know. He agreed. He called it a damnable doctrine. He said, I wish I'd never thought of it. Well, that should tell you something, John. Hello? Right? That should tell you to get rid of it. But he couldn't, because he said it's the only thing that makes sense. So the Armenians said, no. That's not correct. That can't be right. That can't be right. And so you're predestined only in the sense that God is going to offer you salvation. And then you decide whether or not you're going to take it. And so that won out over Calvin. And so there's very few Calvinists left in the world. Very few. I mean, you go to a Presbyterian church today, I doubt you'll ever hear that. Because most, especially American Presbyterians, now Scottish Presbyterians are a different thing, but American Presbyterians, I think the Allegheny Presbyterians, maybe one other small group still believe in that. But the United Presbyterians no longer believe that. Okay? But, and even that, it's a small, relatively small church. You go over the Armenian side, which is you decide whether or not you're going to be saved or not. Whew! That's the Southern Baptist Convention, which is humongous, plus all the other Baptists, plus the Nazarenes, plus the Assemblies of God, plus the Church of Christ, plus the Church of God, plus everybody else. And so Arminius won that battle, hands down, in numbers. Yeah.
In terms of our behaviors, and I think we're all pretty much either Calvinist or
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yes, Lutherans very easily fall into one group or the other. Okay? I've had people in this very church tell me, I know what I decided. I know that I picked Jesus. Some of them said it in public in this very class, this very room. And they believe that. On the other hand, the predestination to election, not damnation, but election, which is not really Calvinist, it's biblical. Okay, predestination to election or predestination to heaven is biblical. Okay, but you're right. Some Lutherans have fallen so far in that camp, you might say, as that, doing good works, who needs that? And so they, eat, drink, and be merry because they don't need that.
Condemn a lot of people because their behavior.
Right. Right. Yes, we do. And that's what Luther described as the good Lutheran middle. Okay? You're not a decision theologist. You believe in election to heaven, but you still also, see the other thing Calvin also, besides election to heaven, he denied that you could fall away. All right? Now again, logically, if you believe in the predestination to heaven and you believe you are predestined to heaven, you can't fall away, right? And yet the Bible tells believers, people chosen by God, take heed lest you fall. Now, why would the Bible say that unless believers can fall away? Again, there is no logical, reasonable answer for that. Just like there's no logical or reasonable answer to the two natures of Christ or the Trinity or the real presence in the Lord's Supper or original sin. Okay? Original sin is not fair, is it? Right? It's fair, I guess, that we inherit Adam's bad genes, but that's not the only way of original sin. Original sin doesn't just come because you're born of sinful parents. Original sin comes to you directly from Adam to every single individual human being. And that does not seem fair, does it? No. Why should we be saddled with Adam's sin? And God does not give an explanation for that. Except to say, well, you want to complain about that, you should also complain about Jesus' righteousness being applied to you, every single individual human being. God is algebra. What you do on one side of the equation, you have to do on the other side of the equation. Okay? That's the only way I can explain it. But even that is not pretty illogical. All right, going on. Much like wine, milk denotes a peaceful and settled life and a prosperous one. Only people who have the time to give attention to herd animals, and those animals are at peace enough to render milk, can enjoy the benefits of this product. If the land is torn by strife and war, and if grain stocks and pasture is scarce, milk becomes a hard commodity to produce. Look at Ukraine, producing 1/2 of the agriculture products that they used to before the invasion in February, or the previous year. It's tough, folks, to get cows to give milk when there's bombs going off. Right? That's a fact. Right? That's a fact. And the same with chickens and eggs, and the same with goats and milk, and the same with just about everything else. Animals kind of need peace and quiet, They need a pastoral setting in order to really produce well. They'll produce, but they won't produce as well as if things are calm and quiet. So that's why the promised land is always described in peace, milk and honey. Milk representing peace and honey representing abundance. The more honey you have, the more bees you have, the happier the bees are, okay, right? People wonder, why has there been a decline in the bee population? Okay, well, you can point to chemicals, certainly. You can point to warmer climate. You can point to various other things. But one of the things I think you could also point to is that turmoil, just plain old turmoil, and kind of abuse of the environment, I guess you could say, has made them somewhat unhappy. Okay,
We see it in the weather.
you do, and so I've had we have beekeepers that deal with our citrus, of course, and this was already years ago before we sold our ranch, and some of the beekeepers were saying, and they would use that terminology. They would say, the bees just aren't very happy. They're not producing like they used to. And of course, we had drug cartels coming through the groves We had, crime out there quite a bit, and things like that. And he said, and traffic. Now there's a freeway on both sides of the growing area, whereas used to be there, it wasn't there. And the Marines, boy, they do a whole lot of takeoffs and landings, a lot louder than they used to with this new jet. And the guy said, they're just not happy. They're just not happy campers. So I think that's the other thing. So when you think of milk and honey, think of peace and prosperity. Okay, that's just a way of saying it. Natural abundance, like I say, and does produce many wonderful natural crops and so on and so forth. The point God is making here is that the climate, topography, and weather of the land of Canaan are all just right to support a large and prosperous population. Now, Palestine, when you look at it on the map, okay, may not seem spacious to us here in America. I think you could stick Palestine, you could stick it on the East Coast and maybe it would take up 2 states, maybe 3, or maybe it's about the same size as just one state of California, something like that. Maybe it's actually a little smaller than California. Okay. The land that was promised to Abraham is about 4 times the area of Israel's portion of the land of Goshen. Okay. So it's still bigger than the Delta area. When you compare the Delta of the Nile to Palestine, it's 4 times larger. So if 5 million people could live in the Delta, right, then 20 million people could live in Palestine, theoretically, right? Okay, so to them, hey, that's a lot of room. Huh? Compared to the relatively cramped quarters that the Israelites had in Egypt, the Promised Land would seem spacious in the extreme. The nations mentioned here, only 5 of the 10 named in Abraham more than 500 years before. The one new name, the Hivites, is still added. Where is that? Somehow I think I jumped. Yeah, they sure are, aren't they? Sorry about that. I have to go back and look at my. Yeah, I'm sorry. I read the wrong section. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll go on. Sorry about that. The meaning is clear. The children of Israel would dispossess numerous peoples, will take over their homes and their land by the will and plan of God. This is an important concept, folks, for us to stop and consider for a minute. All right? There's a lot of talk today, not just here in America, but in other parts of the world, about indigenous peoples. All right? First of all, is there such a thing?
It all depends.
It all depends on what?
What it's meant by.
Okay. It all depends on who you're talking about. Okay? So, technically speaking, there's no such thing. You could say that all cultures, all races were indigenous to the area around the Tower of Babel, and that's it. That's where they're indigenous. Okay? Biblically speaking, according to the Bible, all races, all cultures, all languages, all whatever, came from the area around Tower of Babel, which is relatively Baghdad, relatively around in there. Okay? So from that place, everybody came. So as they moved out, some found a particular spot and said, oh, this is a nice spot, we'll stay here. Now, then I guess you could say they were secondarily indigenous, or they were indigenous, or they may not have got there first. Let's say you've got Tom, Dick, and Harry, okay? You've got Tom's tribe, Dick's tribe, and Harry's tribe. And let's say they take off from Baghdad and they go, let's go this way. Let's say they go towards what we today call China, okay? And so they got these 3 big groups, and the 3 groups speaking different languages, they have different skin tone, different eye features, etc. Okay, and Tom looks one way, Harry looks one way, and Dick looks another way. Okay, So they're marching along, and they're separated because they're still arguing and fighting. It's your fault. You're the one that caused this. No, you're the cause this, whatever. So they're kind of moving in the same direction. And as they move, one of them gets to the area, the mountainous area we call today Afghanistan. And Tom's group says, hey, we kind of like this. We're surrounded by mountains. Yeah, we can hold the British off real easy here. So we're going to stay here. We like this. This is good. We can grow a lot of poppies and make a lot of money, and so we're going to stay here. You guys go on. Well, we'll see you, in funny papers, right? So Dick and Harry, they move along, right? And Dick's group, they get as far as the coast, right? And they see some islands off on the coast. And they say, ooh, those look kind of cool. Let's go over there. And so they make rafts and whatever, and they get over there, and they come to what is today Japan. And they say, this is nice. It's a nice place. Nice, cool mountain there, It's got some jungles in the south and snow for making Olympics in the north and good fish everywhere. And yeah, we'll stay here. Okay, so Dick stays here. Dick's tribes decide to stay there. Okay, and then Harry, he goes across and he says, hey, I think I'll walk across that frozen stuff and see what's on the other side. And he gets to Alaska, and then from Alaska, they go down into the Americas, and they become the American Indians. All right. So, who's indigenous? Well, then you would say, well, they got there first, and so they're indigenous. Well, not really. Because think about Harry. Harry is in the front, right? Tom, Dick, and Harry. I should have started with Harry, sorry. But the idea is that Tom, Dick, and Harry, Tom gets there first, but he keeps going. Let's do it that way. And then Harry stays in Afghanistan, right? So who got there first? Well, Harry got there first. Harry's tribe got there first, but Tom lives there now. You see my point, folks? And then the same goes for Europe. If you look at the archaeology of Europe, you can see various groups. You can see the Celts, for example. The Celts pretty much ran all of Europe and Asia Minor, right? Then they got narrowed down, defeated, narrowed down until they became the Welsh and the Scots and the Irish. Okay? Those are the Celts today. That's it. That's all that's left. And Normans. There's a few Normandy people. And that's it. That's the left of the Celts today. So if all of a sudden you want to give the North and South Dakota back to the Sioux, understand the ramifications of that. So then you have to give France back to the Irish. Well, was French going to stand for that? I don't think so. Okay? They can make an argument. Hey, we won fair and square. And as far as the Sioux goes, where did they come from? Well, as far as DNA tells us, they came from somewhere else. And they pushed out whoever was there first. And same with the Blackfeet, and same with the Crow, and the same with the Apaches, and the same with the Navajos, and all the rest. Okay? They were all somewhere else for the most part and pushed out others. Or, let's say, people talk about the Cherokee, for example, who were really off in Georgia. And then Andrew Jackson, when he was president, caused them all, the Trail of Tears, to move to Oklahoma. Well, guess what? The Cherokee weren't always there. They were someplace else. They were actually up north. And what did they do? They came down south and they pushed out the people that were there. And so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. So we certainly sympathize with groups that lose, right? You can sympathize with the losers, right? Gee, too bad you got beat and whatever. We can sympathize with the Celts. Maybe Paris should be yours, okay? And Vienna for that matter, and Berlin for that matter. But you lost to the Saxons and such. You lost. Sorry. We can feel sorry for them and we can say, gee, that's too bad. But how are you going to undo that at this point? You could, I guess, but to what end? And I'm sure there was somebody there before the Celts. Celts pushed somebody out. Well, let's turn all the land back to the Neanderthals. What's the problem with that? There aren't any. Yeah. Who's that? Are you? Good for you. Ooh, that's interesting.
My husband and I my.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Okay, yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah, all part. Well, that's true. And we're all some Cro-Magnon in there, and yeah, we're not all Homo sapiens sapiens. Yeah, right, exactly. Yes.
How much luck do we have going back across the railroad tracks and getting that back
Right.
as good as it is up on the hills?
Yeah. I mean, folks, the thing about history is you can learn from it, you can study it, you can appreciate it, whatever. You can't undo it. And whenever you try to undo it, more often than not always, but more often than not, it causes more problems than solves. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Canaanites and Amorites. The thing that's always been hard for me, I mean, I understand why God said it, because they became entrapped. But the fact that they had to totally destroy.
Yeah.
That, for me, has always
Yeah.
been difficult to read through the whole Old Testament.
And it happens quite often, doesn't it? It's not just this occasion. There are other occasions as we go on. There are occasions during the time of the kings when some of the kings are told to do the exact same thing. And some of the prophets are said to the kings, you've got to do this. You can't, right, you can't leave anyone alive at all. You can't even leave the animals alive. And yes, this is tough, all right? Now, there's two ways to look at this. One way is to say, okay, even leaving behind one pregnant woman or one guy who could intermarry with somebody else could cause a problem. I'm not sure that's the way to look at it. I mean, technically that would be true. That's possible, certainly, to leave even one. I don't know about leaving one cow behind or one goat behind. I'm not sure about that. But it's true that leaving even one person or one family, let's say, behind or missing on that could cause a problem. Okay. But I'm not sure that's really the way to look at it. The other way to look at it is this is a theological statement. Okay? This is a theological statement. As Jesus himself said, whoever is not for us is against us. Or as he said, whoever believes shall be saved, whoever believes not shall be damned. I think that's a better way to look at it. This is, in other words, this is symbolic. Yes, it has a practical application of not entrapping the believers. That's a practical application. But I think the better way to look upon it is to say, this is symbolic of, with God, there is no third choice. There is no middle ground. It's all or nothing. That's the way it is with God. And along with that, that's also true of life. Okay? What does God say himself? I kill and I make alive. I wound and I heal. I destroy and I create. Okay? In that sense, this is probably what disturbs our modern sensibilities more than anything else, and especially as Americans, especially as people of a citizenship of the United States of America, which is a melting pot, which is, and even today with crazy politics the way it is, and wokeism the way it is, but even yet today, the idea still is everybody's equal. You as a Buddhist, you're just as good as you as a Christian. And you as a Muslim are just as good as you as a Jew and everything else. And for living in a world, okay, for living at peace in this existence, that is a very good idea, isn't it? It's, you would say, almost essential if you're going to have peace. But that's not the way with God. That's not the way with God. The way with God is, you're going to be saved because you believe in Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. And you are a tiny minority of a minority of a minority of a minority. And the other 7.5 billion people in the world are all going to hell. That is a very exclusive statement, and that kind of statement will get you in big trouble in this country. That kind of statement you will be labeled a bigot, you will be labeled prejudiced, you will be labeled, you name it. Okay? Because in our sensibility, that is just, you don't say things like that. Okay? The fact of the matter is, before God, yes, all people are equal as far as sinners and being human and everything else. But also before God, believers go to heaven, unbelievers go to hell. And that, again, there's no middle, as Luther would say, purgatory, no, it doesn't exist. That thief on the cross, he immediately went to heaven because Jesus describes him in believer terms. Okay? Knowing, being God, of course, he could see into his heart and know that he was a believer. That's why he said, that's why he said that. Okay? That kind of exclusivity is very distasteful to us as Americans. We don't like that. Well, that's true too. And it's become, it's kind of gotten out of hand. Frankly, we could be any gender we want or none at all. Yeah. But yeah, you're right. We have always had that. Again, remember where we come from. We all come from somewhere else. Why? Because our ancestors were dissatisfied and unhappy and discontent with where they were. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. If your great-great-great-great-grandfather was happy living in Schleswig-Holstein, well, you'd be speaking German and dressing up in lederhosen now, okay, and not just to go to the park, But he wasn't happy. He wasn't happy, and so he sold his farm and pigs and whatever, and got on a rickety old boat and went across the ocean in bad weather and landed in, let's say, Buffalo, New York, and said, "Here I stay." Dummy. The smart ones landed in Galveston and said, "Hey, this is nice. Let's start barbecue. Let's get the grill out." Yeah. Other ones landed in St. Louis and said, "It's okay, kind of in the middle. Yeah, I got 4 seasons. I like that. That's cool." Yeah, everybody came here because they didn't like where they were. And so and they wanted to make something else of themselves. Some wanted to change their occupation. Some just wanted to make more money at their occupation. Some wanted out from underneath the thumb of a king or a duke or an earl or something like that, and so on and so forth. And so, yeah, by nature, we are a civilization, we are a society here in America who likes to make something out of nothing. That's kind of our thing, and we like to make ourselves in our own image, whatever that may be. All right? Yeah, for the most part, yeah, that's right. I got into a long argument with a guy on the internet last week or week before. There was a picture of the cornfield, part of the Battle of Sharpsburg or Antietam, and in the cornfield it was a picture of the 1st Texas Infantry charging across the cornfield, and the Yankees were hidden in a what's called the Sunken Road, which changed hands numerous times, and they were just mowing down the Confederates left, right, and upside down. And these guys just kept charging. They just kept coming. They finally overtook the Sunken Road, and it was in Confederate hands for a while, and then it changed hands again after that. And this guy was saying how amazing that was. As one person was, "Oh man, the amazing! These guys, why in the world were they doing that? That was so stupid, And so I wrote back and I said, "Can you imagine people doing this, especially the 1st Infantry? I know quite a bit about the 1st Texas Infantry. None of the guys in the 1st Texas Infantry, including the officers, owned any slaves at all. That wasn't as big a deal in Texas, at least that part of Texas, as it was other places. And they had nothing to do with it. They didn't care about it one way or another. Okay, they just felt that, hey, they were invaded, and they're fighting back. And I said to this guy, I said, "Do you think for 1 minute that those guys are facing 50 caliber mini balls? Right? Can you imagine 50 caliber hitting you at 2,000 feet per second? Man, you're a goner real quick. Weren't a lot of wounded in that battle. Most of them died. What was it? 38,600 died in the Battle of Antietam. The largest single one-day loss of American soldiers ever in the history of our country to this very day, including World War II and everything else. He argued with me. He said, "Oh, no, you know what you're talking about. They're all a bunch of bigots and black haters and all this stuff like that." And I said, most of them didn't even know a black person. But that's the thing about it. You're right. We tend to think, well, we're protecting ourselves. We ourselves are better than those guys over there. It must have been really tough for the Irish, because there was an Irish brigade on both sides. And in the Battle of Fredericksburg, they fought each other, and most of them were cousins and nephews and not nieces, cousins and nephews and stuff, yeah, and uncles and things, and people of the same family, yeah. It just depended on where you lived. If you lived in North Carolina, in the hills of North Carolina, you enlisted in that, and if you lived in New York, you enlisted in the other one. Okay. So they will dispossess many peoples. Okay, this is what's going on. Does this sound unfair and unjust to us? Yes, of course it does, no question about it. But only insofar as human reason and our idea of fairness goes. As Jesus was once to say, the Lord has need of it. That's enough of a reason. That makes it fair and just and right, whether we think so or not. So, who wins the battles, right? Who God wants to win the battle. Think about it. We like to talk, when we think about history, and especially warfare, we like to talk about happy accidents. All right? Happy accidents. Okay? It was a happy accident that one of our scout planes just happened to cross the Japanese Imperial Fleet outside of Midway instead of missing it. Could easily, he was out of gas for all intents and purposes. He needed to turn around, and he didn't. He just kept going. Well, if I go one more league, one more mile, one more whatever, and he spotted it through the clouds. If he hadn't done that, and they'd have got around him, no Battle of Midway. Probably California belongs to Japan now. So maybe that would be a good thing. I don't know. Anyway. There are no accidents on the battlefield, folks. I like to use George Washington as an example. His one of his coats was up for auction a few years back, and it was a coat he wore into battle. And when they inspected it, they found, I think, 9 bullet holes, and some of the bullet holes were in places where he should have been wounded, right? I mean, they weren't always in his fringes or in his cuffs. Some of them were in places where he should have been wounded and actually should have been killed, should have been dead. But he never, in all the 6 years of war, almost 7 years of war, he was never wounded once. And this guy on a white horse, tall guy, he was almost 6 foot, or a little over 6 foot. And in those days, that was a pretty tall fella. He stood out. Okay? He was a big man. And is referred to by historians as the indispensable man. Without him, there's no America. Most historians agree that. Without him, there's no United States, America. No, absolutely not. Did God protect him? Probably. Probably. I don't see any other explanation for it. Okay? So there are no accidents on the battlefield. Yes, ma'am. Did you have a question? No? Oh, okay. One more, and then we'll have to cut. Note the big change has come over Moses during the last 40 years. The man who is single-handedly going to free Israel from their bondage now fears to go to Pharaoh as God's chosen spokesman. Moses had become humble, maybe too humble. That's typical of human beings, isn't it? We're really arrogant, so God slaps us down, so then we become really, really humble. And so he has to kind of, wait a minute, I need you to do something. You can't just lay on your behind anymore and do nothing. So he has to kind of bring us back a little bit. Yeah, that's typical. Okay, I'll try to get the reference right next time. I don't know what my brain was thinking. It's been one of those days. All day today was one of those days. Couldn't get my coffee app to work at Dutch Brothers this morning. Would not function. All right. Let's close. May the grace of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, the love of God the Father, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be and abide with us all. Amen.